Hi, my name is Grace Burns, and I am doing the cognate part of the Cognate and Culture Studies presentation with my partner Nathan Hayes, who's covering Culture Studies. Okay, so what are cognate strategies? So, according to the book, teaching English vocabulary is effective, but progress may be most rapid when this instruction is connected to the student's home language, meaning this is their native language, the language they grew up talking in, learning in, etc. Um, Such as providing home language equivalent or synonyms for new words, or focusing on shared cognates. So, cognate is our key word for this presentation today. Um, so, what is a cognate? A cognate is a word from two different languages that shares a meaning, spelling, and pronunciation that's pretty similar. So, for example, the word computadora in Spanish is computer in English. So, they sound very similar, they're spelled pretty similarly, and they mean the same thing. So, what strategies exist for integrating cognates into instruction to help your EL students feel more confident? So, one of them is identifying cognates for words being taught in English. So, this can be done through readings, lessons, etc. And then you want to focus on any spelling differences because this is going to help them in their writing. It's just you want to point out those differences because then they're going to start having patterns about the English language that they have about their native language. You're also going to want to post your cognates in some sort of way as they're studied. So this can be through a vocab sheet, a digital list that they're able to access, or even like a poster in your room, because this will help them so that they always have a running list of cognates, right? And then you're going to want to adapt your cognate strategies to meet the EL development levels of your students. How to begin a lesson with cognates. So, this is really important because these students don't necessarily have all of the same skills as English first language learners. So, to begin a lesson with EL students, you must identify any vocabulary that could be unfamiliar to your students prior to the lesson. Because this is when you, as a teacher, can identify any cognates to point out to your students during the lesson. And you want to kind of prioritize your lesson. What I mean by that is you're going to find a large number of cognates while you're teaching. And it's important to highlight the ones that are important to your lesson first, because in each lesson they're going to learn new ones. So you want to do ones that will help them to understand the lesson they are learning that day or that week or whatever you are working on. And you just want them to be able to understand the little concept they're learning in that moment. And you want to keep it very focused, like I just said. So, identifying any of the differences in spelling that the cognates have and how they're used differently in each respective language is really important. And then again, create that running list of cognates that they can add to over time. So, my activity that I have created is a reading/journaling activity for a late middle school to early high school social studies or English language arts classroom. So, the reading is a whole class read aloud of chapters 1 through 3 of Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry to understand the historical context of racism in the U.S. So, while following along, so this is the little EL part. While following along, EL students will need to identify any words that are similar to Spanish words. And then they will as a class, we will discuss pronunciation, spelling, and then add them to the cognate list. This is really important because, again, you're working as a whole class, right? So even your English first language learners are still reading the same book and understanding the historical context of racism. But then you have this extra little part where EL students have the opportunity to connect cognates to their native language. And then there's a journaling activity. So the journaling activity is after reading write a short reflection in your writing journal about how Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry demonstrates racial tension in the South in the 1930s. And this is where EL students will include any cognates they identified and, again, use them to connect to the context of the story and the context of the lesson. Again, this is like very loose. It's not one specific strategy. It's kind of a lot of strategies coming together to provide them with vocabulary set that they can use when talking or writing, because it's basically like having synonyms just in a different language. So it will really help them to develop their language understanding of English. So what is the impact of this? So for ELL students, the cognate activity transforms their primary language from a potential barrier into a specialized academic tool, because this is giving them actually a better understanding of what they're reading. Instead of just being like, oh, here's a vocabulary list, you're giving them the opportunity to connect their native language to the new language they are learning. And then empowerment. So instead of being behind, these students actually become kind of like an expert in the room, identifying these linguistic links. And so, like I said earlier, when you have that growing cognate list, it allows them to see grammatical patterns as well. So they're able to kind of form more of their grammatical skills as well, because they're noticing, like, oh, this is the part of the word that's different from Spanish, but this is seen over and over again in English, and here is why. And it's used on these kind of words rather than these kind of words. So it's just something that is very useful in that way. Also, active discovery. So it turns the reading more into like a treasure hunt for cognates. And then they're looking for patterns. Again, the patterns are a huge part of their learning. And then it's making the text more interactive for them. It's basically like a native English speaker annotating a book and highlighting any vocabulary they don't know and then going over it with the class. It's just at a different level. And then the text isn't as passive and they're able to learn more from it.
Nice. So for my part of the presentation, we're going to be talking about culture studies. But before we go into culture studies, what is culture? Anyone have any ideas? Okay. So culture best represents the shared sets of values, beliefs, and behaviors that a group shares with one another. Generally, variations in culture often occur based on differences in geographical location, example by nationality and ethnicity, and also language. Some examples from the real world are removing shoes before entering a home that's a very common practice, especially in Asian countries and, of course, many other countries, but it's most prevalent in Asian countries. The shared family-style meals are more common in some cultures than other. Tattoos, both permanent and semi-permanent, such as henna. Like, Polynesian people have very strong ties with their tattoos, and um, they're very meaningful. Like, there are a lot of tattoos that they get at different stages of life, like after accomplishing certain things, and I think it's beautiful. I love it so much. And then, like, with henna, it's most commonly seen in like Middle Eastern, Indian cultures for various events, like especially for weddings. Weddings is a big thing for henna. And then also different types of greetings vary culturally, just like bowing, kisses, nose pressing, and handshakes. Alright, so now we're going to start with the beginning of culture studies. I have a few questions that I want you guys to think about before we get started. So first off, what languages do you guys speak? Do you guys speak English? Do you guys speak Spanish? Do you guys speak any other languages? Okay. Okay. All right. Now, what about culture groups? What cultural groups do you guys belong to? All right. And where are you guys from? Are you guys from the US? Are you guys from out of the US? Are you guys from Arizona, California, anywhere like that? All right. And what are your guys' favorite aspects of your cultures? Do you guys have anything that stands out to you? And what about your family? How do any of these questions apply to your family? I'll give you guys a few seconds to think about it before we move on. Alright, so to start off, I just want to point out that your background is what makes you you. So for any of the questions that we talked about prior, like the languages that you speak, where you grew up, your specific nationality or your ethnicity, or any little things that you guys did growing up, like the examples that I had in the slide before. Like, do you guys have specific things that tailor to your culture, like bowing as a greeting, or taking your shoes off before you go in the house, or even tattoos, or literally anything else? That everything that belongs to your culture and or cultures make up how you are. And there is a quote that I pulled from our reading lesson to create this lesson. So it says, "People are different, people are the same. The way we do things changes from generation to generation." It just points at, like, I think it's a really good quote because it really just brings down the idea that everyone all has similarities and differences, but we're all people, no matter what. Like, me and you may be very different from each other, but that doesn't mean we also have nothing in common whatsoever. Like, everyone has their differences. But I wanted to point out an example of cult, of of students, and I'll have you guys point out some of the cultural differences. So this is Mateo. He says, "Hi, my name is Mateo. My parents moved from the United States to Puerto Rico before I was born. I'm bilingual, and my favorite food is burgers." Do you guys have any thoughts about what his background might look like, what his cultural background might look like? All right, all right. So he grew up, or both he and his parents grew up in two different countries. So his parents grew up in Puerto Rico, and and when they moved to the United States, that's when they had Mateo. So both he and his family have totally different backgrounds when it comes to where they grew up. And so that means that they were exposed to different foods, different customs, different values, etc. It's very big like, it's a bigger difference than people may think. Like, Puerto Rico isn't very far from the US, but it can still be a very different experience. And same with the language fluency, that is another big part of his culture. He grew up speaking both Spanish and English, so he has more exposure um, to things in both languages. Like, he is able to fluently um, interact with people that speak both Spanish and English, while his parents might have a little bit harder of a time speaking English, depending on their fluency. But for now, it doesn't say that. But those are just examples of what a student like you might have, um, or examples of differences that students like you might have culturally. Another example, or another thing that I'd like to point out, is the food. That is another big thing. Um, I'm sure there are I'm sure there are burgers in Puerto Rico, but that definitely isn't the main food there. There are like Puerto Rico has its own specific type of cuisine, and burgers are more known in the United States. So that is another little difference um, there. Hi, so now we're going to be talking about the cultural studies activity. So I broke this down into three separate sections to make it a little bit easier to understand. So for the first part, we're going to start brainstorming. Take a moment to think about aspects of your own culture, and to break it down, we broke it into three different categories for you guys to choose from for this activity. So the first section is going to be, where are you or your family from? So where is your origin? The second section is going to be talking about favorite food based on your culture or even other cultures. It doesn't have to specifically be one. And then we're also going to be talking about traditions you might celebrate. So before I give you some time to brainstorm, I have an example of my own. So I separated my paper, or I guess my slide in this case, into three separate sections for each section that we're going to be talking about. For my origin, my great-great-grandparents are from Mexico, but the rest of my family has lived in the United States since. So that is a big part of my culture. It's that, like, my family in the later years have a lot more cultural and traditions from Mexico, but as we've lived in the United States for much longer, some of those traditions have kind of died out, and we kind of have our own little traditions now that we've lived in the United States for so long. And for the food, tamales are one of my favorite foods ever, red chili in specific, and then birria tacos and quesadillas are also fantastic. Then for traditions, I technically have three listed right here. The first tradition is celebrating Christmas, and the second ones are making food around Christmas time. So my family always makes tamales and bizcochitos every Christmas time. We make them for the whole family. It's a very fun activity. And just for a little clarification, bizcochitos are a type of cookie. They're, I mean, they're somewhat similar to sugar cookies, not quite, but they do have cinnamon and sugar on top. They're very delicious. But I'll give you guys a few minutes to start brainstorming on your own papers. Alright, so now we're going to go back to the other slide. For the second part of this activity, we're going to have 3 rounds where we focus on a different question for every round. You're going to be given 5 minutes to find as many people as you can that listed down different answers than you. So, for an example, if I was doing this activity and we focused on traditions that you celebrate, let's say I put down Christmas as the tradition that I celebrate. So my goal in that 5 minutes would be to find someone else that is celebrating, or to find someone else that put down a different tradition that you celebrate. You can still both celebrate the same thing. Like if I talk to someone that celebrates Christmas as well, but if they wrote down something else, like if they wrote down that they celebrate Chinese New Year, or not Chinese New Year, oh, I guess it could be Chinese New Year, or literally anything else, so then that would still count. It's mainly just based on what you guys are writing on the papers. So we'll go through and talk about your origin, where your family is from for 5 minutes, and then we're going to be talking about your favorite food, and then the traditions that you celebrate. So every time you talk to someone that has a different answer written down on their paper, you write a tally mark next to your name. So your goal is to try and find as many people as you can that has different answers as you. So my goal would be to find people that listed down different traditions that they celebrate, like New Year's, Chinese New Year, Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, you name it. And then after the activity is over, we're going to compare. We're going to give you some time to compare your answers to the answers that you received from your classmates. What similarities did you guys have? How many people did you talk to that had the same answers as you? And then also, how many people did you talk to that had different answers as you? And then, did you learn anything new about your cultures or your classmates' cultures? Any questions for the activity? All right. Well, that is the activity for today.